Welcome.
The Combine as the overarching antagonists of the Half-Life universe are, by design, a force difficult to quantify. An ever-expanding union which spans countless dimensions is, ironically, impossible to depict as a whole which includes every civilization making it up. It can only ever be depicted in fragments. A being's understanding of such a force would vary from world to world as it adapts itself to differing environmental and population wrangling requirements. Different units and different structures must be deployed, different cells and different limbs specialized for the exact material they are working with. That is to say, it's quite difficult to call what humanity deals with over the course of the current games as the Combine, if a progenitor even exists in something this large. Still, there exists a need for a marker of conquest, something that unifies both the occupation force and the initiated species. A Zoid can't survive outside of the colonial animal. It is for this exact purpose that this union employs the Citadel. Acting as command post for the local force, I would argue it's the closest thing Half-Life 2 and its episodes have to an individual antagonist. This role often attributed to Earth's administrator despite him being subsumed into a mere component of it, a face it uses to communicate with its herd. He is one of the first parts of this greater body to die off, leaving him totally uninvolved in the 2-episode Aftermath storyline. The Citadel, though? This is a structure which acts against humanity throughout the series, possesses motivation, even undergoes a narrative arc in which both its aims and its physical state are altered. That is to say, of course, the Citadel is a character, and an exploration of it from this exact lens would be well worthwhile. The structure's been implanted. Befitting an organism so strictly defined by parasitism, the Citadel's life cycle is kicked off with the surgical removal of a city block, followed by the subsequent implanting of the core. The storms documented by Alex suggest that the structure may have spent its infancy acting as a sort of umbilical, allowing the greater Combine to funnel in whatever forces are required to stabilize their occupation. By the time period of Half-Life Alyx, the structure had matured and already assumed the duty of centralized command, the dimensional umbilical to the overworld having been severed with sustained connection deemed no longer necessary. It steadily progresses to full maturity, soaking up processed resources as the construction efforts ramp up and its control over the city is consolidated. As a more background presence in this installment, it nonetheless actively deploys and commands the units utilized in attempts at halting Alex's breach of the vault, a prophylactic measure intended to isolate and ship off a potential contagion.
Full system alert. Operation engagement 5129. Immediate concurrent deployment 5129.
At this point, the Citadel approaches this as simple disease prevention, mere handling of a foreign element that may prove problematic if left unchecked. Nevertheless, the eventual failure of quarantine and subsequent loosing of this foreign element into the environment causes the superstructure to tighten its grip on the populace, enforcing strict dress code, restricting citizen ground movement via barriers, and likely instating the constant relocations witnessed in the second game. Thus, preparations are made for the eventuality of a more destructive outbreak. The structure's reached maturity. At the point of the Freeman's insertion, thorough preparations have been made, precautions taken to ensure a stray contaminant such as him could be located and managed before a significant socio-infection could take hold. Population counts are monitored thoroughly down to each individual occupant in a particular block, and if one were to pause and listen to Metrocop chatter, you can already hear them take note of a discrepancy.
You'll have to pick up a 647E reading. Check for miscount. Still getting that 647E from local surveillance.
Until later identified, Gordon is treated as a somewhat routine foreign element to be apprehended and processed. Only after an identification on the administrator's behalf does it begin adjusting its assessment of him.
The man I saw, I'm all but certain it was Gordon Freeman.
Individual, you are convicted of multi-anti-civil violations. Implicit citizenship revoked. Status, malignant.
This is no routine contaminant. The Freeman is a figure who could disastrously bolster the scientific resistance movement if left unchecked, and thus he is designated Anti-Citizen 1 and heavy equipment is deployed to have him amputated. With the aid of a subverted rebel cell, Judith Mossman, an appropriate clamp is devised which could result in the complete neutralization of the resistance movement if set off at the perfect time. Black Mesa East could be just the place the superstructure needs to defang the entire contagion if utilized properly. This is where the Citadel makes the first in a series of mistakes which will force it to completely abandon the hope of managing this socio-infection while keeping itself intact. The success of this trap hinges on it snapping at the exact signal given by the Administrator's contact.
You would have had Freeman if you'd been patient and just waited for my signal.
We weren't entirely sure you were ever going to get around to that. Human loyalties being what they are.
The superstructure is expected to rely on human loyalties, something neither its size nor nature would permit. On confirmation of Anti-Citizen 1's presence, the trap snaps early, causing 2 out of 3 priority targets to escape, further emboldened by their new directive, the rescue of Eli Vance. Nova Prospect, a significant stronghold and another mark of conquest, is eventually compromised by the escaped Anti-Citizen 1 and Vance Subprime. Mossman continues to put her trust in the superstructure despite remaining unreciprocated, helping dampen the crisis by relocating Eli to the Administrator's quarters. Still, the unthinkable occurs. With the fall of Nova Prospect, Freeman successfully inspires an uprising in City 17. The socio-infection flares. The Citadel's integrity soon takes priority over the city's stability, and thus the structure resorts to increasingly desperate and violent measures in its attempts to contain an ever-growing outbreak. With coordinated methods of capture becoming essentially impossible due to the sheer number of malignant elements demanding attention, the structure takes advantage of the first possible opening presented to it, containing Vance Subprime while Anti-Citizen 1 progresses further towards the Citadel unabated. His remaining cohorts, again emboldened by this reckless capture, assist Freeman in breaching the Citadel wall. Attempts to defang and contain him completely fail as a piece of rebel tech is supercharged by the Citadel's confiscation system, and before long the entire fate of the superstructure is in the hands of uncontrolled human elements gathered at its very top. Unfortunately, the structure's repeated failures to show even a sliver of trust or respect to its unconverted collaborators have pushed Mossman to the breaking point, and so she sets the Resistance members free, sending Earth's Administrator running in hopes that at least one member of the species could be preserved for further use.
Judith? What do you think you're doing?
We're doing what I could never do alone. We're stopping you.
It's me you should be concerned about. I can still deliver Earth, but not without your help.
Managing this socio-infection has become utterly impossible. It has overwhelmed the immune system and settled in its vital organs. The final attempt to salvage this crisis fails completely as Freeman destabilizes the dark fusion reactor, blowing the roof off of the strongest symbol of the Combine occupation. The structure is compromised. The socio-infection now threatens to leave this whole branch entirely unusable for the greater body. Recovery, however, remains possible. The unusable bits must be wiped away and a new entry point opened, and thus the Citadel and the Resistance find themselves with their goals temporarily swapped. A process is set in motion, not dissimilar to the body cooking itself in hopes the disease burns up before its insides do. Every cell in the structure moves with the intent of boosting its downfall, while Anti-Citizen 1 and Vance Subprime find themselves breaching it yet again in hopes of slowing its deliberate self-destruction to buy themselves and their cohorts time to escape. I find now an appropriate time to note just how well the Citadel embodies the Combine's tendencies of blending the mechanical with the organic. The most obvious organic element would be the translucent veins strewn all about the building, but I'd be remiss not to mention the Citadel's core. It beats like a heart, and visually, it's very deliberately reminiscent of a cell nucleus, even fulfilling a similar function as Alex insinuates is currently accumulating the data which will be fed into the superportal during the dark energy flare.
They were feeding huge volumes of data directly into the core destruction sequence.
Units move around the area in precise, coordinated lines, not unlike cells moving around a body in accordance to its needs communicated via the structure's voice, the Overwatch. The structure and the precise ecosystem within are a sort of microcosm of the way the greater Combine operates. A massive body which subsumes worlds into mere microbiota, toiling away within the host's cavities. Unfortunately for it, as such a system grows, so do the innumerable exploitable holes it grows riddled with. While most of the disposable cells work to accelerate the superstructure's dying, others are sent outward with intent to preserve the occupation's integrity, containing the subverted citizens within the blast radius while ensuring the Force's thinkers are well out of harm's way. This is, perhaps, the only time in the whole series we see this greater whole suddenly scatter into uncoordinated, smaller pieces, no longer heeding their structure's instructions as it loses awareness of its own condition.
Deploy. Diagnose. Deploy. Diagnose. Present singularity. Present singularity.
The city has devolved into a breeding ground for both anti-citizen and exogen infestation. Some units have taken to simply clearing away the obstructive remnants of human architecture for when the greater body begins to sterilize the wound. Others focus on preventing the escape of Anti-Citizen 1 and Vance Supreme, who continue to pose a threat after extracting the data they've been feeding into the Citadel's sputtering core. Episode 1 is essentially the Citadel dying while its forces scramble in different directions to prepare for what comes after, trying to secure the ideal conditions for a restoration effort. The episode is capped off with the successful detonation of the Citadel's dark energy flare, while its scattered forces fail to prevent the Resistance's evacuation. Still, the most vital components of the central body have been preserved and extracted, ready to hunt Gordon and Alex with renewed cohesion. The structure is dead. CD-17 is thoroughly scorched. The superportal has successfully passed conception and is now at its infancy. The Combine's hold on Earth, however, remains in an extremely fragile state, as long as Vance Supreme holds the contact code for the Combine overworld. While the body may be destroyed, the Overwatch voice directing the forces has seemingly been extracted and has now begun scouring the Outlands in search of the duo.
Ongoing sector sweep. Biotics confirmed. Continue surface sector sweep. Remote compliance. Exterminate. Seek passive signature imprint. Mandate sublevel restrictions.
Thus begins a noticeable shift in focus on the Force's part. The remnants of the structure becoming more invested in the Vances, both of them key figures in coordinating the Earth occupation's impairment. Having endured a significant crisis, the Force now sees the unchecked socio-infection as a substantial threat, and now perceives importance in disrupting the Resistance movement's coordination in a similar manner before a re-invasion can commence. With the perceived main body destroyed, the remaining cells would be far easier to manage. Thus, the scattered forces begin to consolidate with the end goal of a coordinated assault on the Resistance nexus, White Forest. The irony is that despite its scattered nature, Episode 2 is the closest the structure's remaining forces have ever gotten to actually neutralizing both Gordon and Alex. The two barely make it out of the train before Alex is singled out and attacked, pulled from the brink of death only with the help of a species the occupation saw as mere living power sources. Gordon nearly gets a free trepanation after forcing an advisor out of its spot, an advisor that, I believe, may be glimpsed during the White Forest raid and could be one of the two involved in the hangar attack. Mind you, this is a species that normally seems to live out its life in an enclosed and controlled artificial bubble, successfully developing a tolerance to Earth's environment. Certain Striders encountered in the attack on the White Forest base seem to resort to bum rush tactics, otherwise exhibited only by a lone, desperate unit attempting to halt Freeman's escape from City-17. With the supporting infrastructure kicked out from under them, the Citadel's surviving units are forced to adapt as fodder grows increasingly limited. The Citadel's arc is capped off when the successful launch of the Resistance's Xenium Resonator renders the structure entirely useless. Its final, posthumous threat has been neutralized, forcing what's left of its microbiota, still commanded by what little of its will could be salvaged, to seek alternative methods of reconnecting with the greater body. From this perspective, if I were to summarize the Citadel's arc in a single word, the one I'd find the most apt would be decay. It depicts a colonial, parasitic body's early development, its reaction to a contagion, its succumbing and eventual scattering into smaller components in one final attempt at self-preservation. The Citadel underestimated the capabilities of the scientific resistance movement and, as a result, was forced to raise the stakes until it completely destroyed itself. This most certainly displays the fatal flaw in the greater Combine entity. As outlined by Mark Laidlaw himself in Epistle 3, the superstructure is riddled with cracks. The body is vast, so vast it no longer notices nor cares for the comparatively microscopic opposition, which is more than capable of exploiting these uncountable micro-tears in its tissue. It is my sincere belief that even if the Greater Combine won't fall for a long time, this universal union will eventually succumb to the same unstoppable gangrene which toppled the limb it had clasped around Earth.